An army of time travelers has arrived from the future to ask for help. The world is going to end in the hands of the deadly aliens, and the only way to stop it is to travel to the future and fight in tomorrow's war. Dan Forrester is a high school science teacher, but his biggest dream is to work in the military science labs. He applies for the job and reaches the final testing. Dan is really excited and informs her wife Emmy and her sweet little daughter Maury. They are having a Christmas party at home, and Maury wants Dan to spare some time to watch the football match with her, but he suddenly gets a call from the employer and excuses himself. The employer tells Dan that he is a great candidate, but lacks experience in this field. Therefore, they have selected someone else for this post. Poor Dan returns home and watches the football match to distract himself. It's the final match, and all fans have glued their eyes on the ground. But suddenly, something unexpected happens. A weird portal opens in the middle of the ground, and a bunch of soldiers step out of it. They claim to be part of the future, 30 years ahead. In their time, the world is almost destroyed by an alien attack, and just a few of them are left. They need more enforcement to stop humans from getting extinct. That's why they have traveled back to the past to take more soldiers with them. This incident shocks the whole world. Just in a few months, the lives of all the humans completely changed. Jump facilities are built around the globe to send the world's military into the future and help fight the aliens called white spikes. In the first batch, 1,000 soldiers are sent into the future for 7 days. There were high hopes from them, but unfortunately, only a handful of troops survived. Due to the lack of enough qualified soldiers, the governments decide to send selected civilians. A second batch of 1,000 civilians are sent to the future, but it's still not enough. Now the public is getting doubtful of these efforts and wonder if they are even worth it. There are protests all over the world, and no more civilians are willing to take part in this mission. So the government takes a brutal step and starts kidnapping people to force them to go on this mission. This causes an even worse impact on the public, and they have given up on their lives. Their loved ones are thrown into hell, and even if the rest of them survive, they have to face the aliens in the future anyway. Dan's students have the same concerns, but Dan explains that the most valuable people in the current circumstances are the scientists. If they focus on science, they can invent something to deal with the aliens. Little does Dan know that he is the next candidate for this mission. He gets called in by the jump facility that is supervised by the soldiers that arrived from the future. They use a special device to check when Dan will die. Any civilian who is going to die in the next few years must serve in this mission. Dan is supposed to die just after the next 7 years, so he gets chosen to jump to the future war. A weird device is pierced onto his arm, which will allow the facility to locate his activities so he can't run away. If he tries to remove the device, he will be thrown in jail, and his wife will need to serve in his place. Dan is given 1 day to meet his family and friends. Emily panics on hearing this news and suggests that they should run away with their daughter. There's only one man who can help them, and it's Dan's father. Dan hasn't met him for years because he abandoned the family when Dan was just a little kid. He's an expert in engineering, but there's no visible source of his income, and he lives in a shady place. That's why Dan never visits him. His dad assures that the tracking device can be removed, but Dan starts talking about the past and how his mother struggled alone. Hearing this, his dad says that there's a lot Dan doesn't know. He left the family to protect them from himself. Dan doesn't understand and believes that his dad is just making excuses and doesn't deserve another chance. This enrages him so much that he refuses to get the help and returns home. He tells Emily that they have no other option than hoping that Dan survives the 7 days mission. He also says goodbye to Maury and promises to return back soon. The next day he reports to the facility for training, where a sergeant briefs the mission. All those who stay alive after 7 days will be teleported back to the present. Their training doesn't include any exercise like in the military. They are only taught to use weapons. The civilians get divided into 2 groups. Dan gets in the R Force and befriends a guy named Charlie. The group also includes a tough guy named Dorian, who is voluntarily going on this mission for the 3rd time. He is known for killing several white spikes, and he also wears 1 spike as a necklace. Dan prefers staying beside Charlie and hearing his theories. Charlie concluded that they can't jump to the time where they are already present. All the members of the current round are those who are already dead in the year they are jumping to, and the people who came from the future are those who haven't been born in the current year. Dan likes this theory and becomes a good friend with Charlie. Moreover, the time machine called Jump Links can only teleport them back and forth in the year 30 times apart. The sergeant explains that the white spikes crawl back to their nest after every 6 days, so that's the time they send the troops to carry out the missions. Dan and other soldiers go to sleep in peace because they assume that they still have 7 days till the mission. But they are called out in the middle of the night. The labs in the future are attacked, and all the research done on white spikes is at risk. Therefore, the troops must be deported right now. They all gathered in a hall where the portal is opened to take them to the future. Unfortunately, due to an error, instead of landing on the beach, the troops fall in the middle of the city, and most of them die by getting injured. A future soldier named Romeo contacts Dan and asks him to lead the mission, as he used to work in the military before. Their mission is to rescue the research team from the city lab. Dan tells 2 soldiers to guard the building while the rest of them enter the lab. Unfortunately, all the researchers have been killed, but the bodies are still there so the aliens can return any time. Romeo tells Dan to collect several research materials, like flash drives and lab samples. He puts them in a box and proceeds towards the exit. Suddenly, they hear someone coming from upstairs. It's the white spikes. Now the soldiers understand why they weren't shown the pictures of the aliens. They are creepiest creatures one has ever seen. They are huge in size with several tentacles and hundreds of sharp teeth. The soldiers run downstairs while continuously shooting at the aliens. Dorian instructs them to aim for the belly. The soldiers try their best, but the aliens are too many in number and kill several soldiers. Romeo tells them to run as fast as they can. She has sent helicopters and vehicles to rescue them. Dan and other soldiers reach the smoke signal where the vehicles are waiting for them. But before they can ride them, the white spikes destroy the vehicles and kill the drivers. The remaining troops run for their lives. 2 of the brave soldiers sacrifice themselves to stop the aliens under the bridge. A missile is thrown on the bridge to kill the aliens while the survivors are taken to the military camp. Dorian advises Dan to act better next time. Instead of bothering about saving his mates, he should focus on the mission. Whatever happens here doesn't matter. They should worry about changing the past that brought this calamity. Dan doesn't agree. For him, all are humans, no matter which time period they belong to. Hearing this, Dorian shares his own purpose of joining the mission again and again. He is suffering from cancer and might die in a few months. He wants to give his short life a purpose and die in a memorable way. Their conversation is interrupted by a soldier who takes Dan to meet the commander of the future military base. She tells him that they have met before, and Dan instantly realizes that it's no other than his beloved daughter Muri. She has become a well-known researcher as she dreamed in childhood. However, she seems a little distant from Dan. Muri says that her biggest priority right now is to save the human species. She didn't bring his dad to spend time with him. There's a special purpose for which Dan is being chosen. Before telling him that Muri needs to explain a few other things, she shows Dan a footage of a female white spike. It's more aggressive and usually stays in the nest laying eggs, while the male ones protect her with their lives. The aliens only care about the survival of their species. They somehow manage to enter the Earth without getting caught by any radar or satellite. For the first time, they appeared in Russia and then took over all the world. Muri has developed a toxin that works on the male aliens, but the female ones are tougher. Their next mission is to bring a female white spike to the lab alive. Dan joins this mission too, and they reach the alien's nest. Firstly, they kill the males in the nest with the toxins, and then enter inside to catch the female. Dan stays in the helicopter and keeps an eye on the surroundings. He suddenly sees more and more aliens proceeding towards them, so he rushes to help his daughter. The female is trapped in a cage and carried away by the helicopter, while Dan and Muri ride a jeep to escape the deadly area. After reaching the beach, Muri sends a signal to her team and waits for its arrival. She takes this time as a chance to scold Dan for following her to the nest. Dan explains that he can't leave her daughter alone, but these words bring tears in Muri's eyes. She says that she always trusted her father more than anyone, but one day he left. Her parents separated when she was 12, and when she was 16, her dad died in a car accident. Muri saw this all with her eyes and couldn't get over it. She thought that her dad would save their family, but she was wrong. Dan can't believe he is going to do something that he hates his own dad for doing. Before he can say another word, the rescue team arrives and takes them to their main headquarters located in the middle of the sea. The female alien is locked in the lab and injected with toxins every hour to keep her under control. However, her body detoxifies really quick, so Muri needs to figure out how that happens, and then she needs to design an enzyme inhibitor to neutralize it. Once that's done, all of the aliens can be killed and they will win the war. For the next few days, Muri runs tests non-stop. She tries 10,000 combinations to discover the toxin, but none of them gives a 100% result. Dan wants to help and asks what's his purpose here. Muri finally reveals the plan. Once the toxin is prepared, she wants Dan to take it back to his time and mass produce it to stop the aliens before they spread. She doesn't want to trust anyone else beside her dad. Dan is leaving today and agrees to take the toxin, but he wants to return back to save Maury. Once the toxin is perfected, Maury hands it over to Dan. Suddenly, an emergency is alerted. The white spikes have eventually found their headquarters and reached there in thousands of numbers. Maury and Dan grab their weapons and fight the enemies while standing back to back. All the vehicles and helicopters are also destroyed, so there's no hope left. Maury is injured too, and tells Dan to focus on the mission. He will teleport back any minute. He must take the responsibility of saving the world, and don't let this cursed future ever happen. Dan is not willing to let her daughter go, but his time is up. Maury falls in the mouth of the deadly aliens while Dan and other survivors get back to their time. Dan asks to send him to the future again, but it's not possible anymore as the jump link in the future is destroyed. After recovering from his injuries, he gets back home, but can't get over what he experienced. He wants to save the future Maury, even if it means saving the whole world. He meets up with Charlie and Dorian. They try to figure out where the alien spaceship is going to land. Dan takes Dorian necklace to examine the volcanic ash on the alien's spike. Then he takes help from his student, who is an expert in such topics. He concludes that such ash is buried in the glaciers of Russia. Dan shares his theory with the government, but it refuses to fund his research. Now only one man can help them. Maury gave Dan a second chance, and now he's going to give his dad a chance too. The old man immediately agrees and helps them travel to the glaciers. They find the alien spaceship crashed in an ice cave. It will take around 20 years for ice to melt, and the white spikes are reproducing till then. If Dan returns to government right now, it will take too long to carry out this mission, so he decides to put an end to it himself. They start injecting the eggs with the toxins, but a few aliens hatch out. Dorian tells Dan to get out while he blasts the spaceship with a time bomb and gets the heroic death he wanted. Unfortunately, a female alien has escaped. Dan and his father follow her and fight while standing back to back. His dad volunteers to sacrifice himself, but Dan saves him and injects the alien with toxin before throwing her off the cliff. Finally, he saved the world and her future daughter. Dan goes back home and also brings his dad to enjoy the remaining years of his life in peace. Making mistakes is human nature, but everyone deserves at least a second chance.